Hey everyone, today is a bit of an interesting day because I want to do a comparison of Robinson Crusoe, the novel written by Daniel Defoe in 1719, and Robinson Crusoe, the board game designed by Ignacy. Hopefully I did that okay, which was published in 2012 and is already on its second edition. I just recently finished reading the novel. It was a really great read. I will say you have to get past the first 50 pages, and right when you hit that 50th page, you're in the sweet spot because you've begun his castaway adventure. And especially also because in the first little bit of the book, you're somewhat adapting to the slightly older English language and just his general manner of speaking, as it's a first-person narrative given by Robinson himself. So let's take a look at some of the components and talk a little bit about how the book translated into the game. So actually, before taking a look at the components, the first thing that I would mention that is very interesting when you get to reading this novel is when Robinson is stranded on the island, he spends his first night in utter fear. I mean, obviously he doesn't know what's on the island and everyone has died, he assumes, except for him. And so after he finishes one sleep up in a tree, he gets to make 12 raft trips back to the wrecked ship and recover all manner of goods. And he honestly has it quite good for pretty much his entire duration on the island, to be honest. And if you've ever played Robinson Crusoe, the board game, you know that your odds of survival are they're quite low, and you can make the game harder on yourself. You can not play with Joe Friday, you can not play with the dog, all these, there's helper extra pawns because the game is actually really difficult. If you don't die of wounds, you may just simply not accomplish your mission. But again, Robinson in the novel, he's practically, besides his, miserable condition of being utterly alone there, and, unknowingly, or doesn't have any knowledge of what might happen to him, honestly, it's even a pretty safe island overall until, later he figures out, okay, well, there are some cannibals showing up now and again, and I need to keep myself hidden in those cases. But that, to me, struck as the largest difference. But you know what? That's probably what makes Robinson Crusoe a good cooperative board game, because if it was an easy cooperative, we'd all play it once, maybe twice if it was, interesting, and from then on we'd say, well, I already conquered that board game. So it's probably a good balance to strike, but it was a huge shocker when I read this book, seeing just how, like I said, well off he was. He collected things from the ship, like he got clothing, he got iron, he got tools, he got the sails down, he got he got gold, which wasn't helpful to him on the island, but later when you leave an island, if you've got lots of gold on you, that's a pretty handy thing. He's got tons and tons of ammunition for the pistols he has, all sorts of things like that. So that was definitely a distinct difference. So, in Robinson Crusoe, the board game, there are 6 scenarios that you are given to give some variety to the game. And these 6 scenarios are Castaways, Cannibal Island, Jenny Needs Help, Volcano Island, Robinson Family, and Cursed Island. In the novel, the cannibals don't actually live on the island that Robinson is on, which he calls the Island of Despair. Rather, the cannibals actually make rather infrequent visits to the island to perform their cannibalistic rituals. More on that in a bit. The Robinson family, Robinson doesn't actually have any family until he makes safe passage home. Again, spoilers. At which point he does have a wife and some children. But in this scenario, it says there's no hope for rescue. You will stay on this island forever. You will build a strong house, create good tools, and raise your family. This is your land. Time to settle it. That is, to be honest, the mentality Robinson takes once he's on the island. He really treats this as an island that he doesn't see nobody's coming to. It's not part of the main explored world at that time. Again, he's been shipwrecked and actually been completely veered off the main seafaring courses at that time. Volcano Island, I actually, thinking about this one, thought it could have been, maybe should have been Earthquake Island or even Hurricane Island, because those are actual things that take place in the novel. Volcano Island, not so much. And Jenny Needs Help. There is no character Jenny in the book. And there's no females on the island. Like I said, with Robinson, he is completely alone until, he sees that footprint and then connects it with cannibals that come sometimes, but it takes years and years and years before anybody shows up besides Robinson in the story. The game is a 4-person cooperative game, and so if you're playing with 4 people, everyone will assume one of these 4 roles: the carpenter, soldier, cook, or explorer. And these are interesting choices. I'd say they overlap well with the character roles that Robinson himself has to take on, especially the carpenter. Robinson talks about how, given enough patience and time, of which he ends up having both on the island, he can build just about anything out of wood, and so he gets to work making himself a table, chairs, shelving for his home, all sorts of things to make his stay more comfortable. The soldier is an interesting one because though Robinson does act the part of a soldier in some manner, especially when he interacts with the cannibals and later with some ship crew members and the captain, and he's certainly armed like a soldier would be. At the same time, I think sailor might have been a little bit more accurate to the novel because basically all of the characters, including Robinson himself, are sailors, and sailors in those days were also well armed. The cook, Robinson definitely invests some time into cooking and becoming better in the kitchen. In fact, eventually he's even able to figure out how to make himself some butter. Explorer, of course, from the get-go, Robinson is tasked with exploring the island, or tasks himself with exploring the island and discovering what there may be there to aid in his survival. So again, an apt character role, I think, not just for a Castaway Island game like this game is, but also reasonably accurate to, like I said, the roles that Robinson himself has to assume in the novel. In the game, there are these different terrain tiles, which you'll be potentially, hopefully, you'll need to be exploring. And you begin on the beach tile, which is very true to the novel, where Robinson himself is washed up on the beach. And then you explore these different terrains, and all the different terrains actually included in the game, from the rivers to the mountains, to the plains or savannas and the jungle. All of these are similar style terrains that are actually found on what Robinson calls the Island of Despair, where he's enjoying his stay. So that's pretty neat. And another thing that I'll say that's really neat about the exploration in this game is when you set up your home base on one of these tiles, there's what you can build called a shortcut. And in the novel, Robinson does at one point during his exploration find a spot where there's a lot of fruit, a lot of grapes, lemons, limes, really good stuff, but it's not exactly right at his home base. And so he makes what he calls his countryside home because, he's a king of the island, and so every good king has a countryside home. And so he makes his countryside home and he'll travel out to it and gather resources from it. And in this game, when you build your more permanent residence, on a tile, you can build, like I said, what's called a shortcut, which allows you to go to an adjacent tile and gather one resource from it per round. So that's, I thought, was a pretty neat way to capture his countryside home using the tiles and this shortcut ability. I kind of mentioned that Robinson got to start with all manner of things when he landed on the island. However, in your case, you would be starting with just 2 of these potential start items and only 2 of them randomly, which I'll say what's interesting is, well, first, there are 3 of these items that are not true to the novel: the storm glass, the empty bottle — Robinson laments how he doesn't have anything to carry water in — and a pipe and tobacco, which he also strongly desires for his stay, but doesn't have. But what I would say is otherwise really interesting is that there is included a Bible and a pistol, and these 2 things end up really being Robinson's lifesaver. The pistol from a sustenance standpoint, a physical sustenance standpoint, and the Bible from a spiritual sustenance standpoint, where he actually becomes a true convert to Christianity during his stay on the island. And I'll actually say, when John and I play Robinson Crusoe, we honestly find these are the 2 best items that we like to start with: the Bible and the pistol. So interesting that the theme in our case, what we've enjoyed playing with, also has corresponded well to Robinson in the novel, without us even knowing it. In the game, you have the option to increase your chances of success by playing with up to 2 extra action pawns, either Joe Friday and or the dog here. An interesting story about Joe Friday is Joe Friday is actually a cannibal. Now, why doesn't he Robinson? Well, this is because Robinson actually saved Joe Friday on a Friday — that's how he got his name — but saves Joe Friday from being eaten by another tribe of cannibals that is not Joe Friday's tribe. And Robinson actually has something of a dream of this because he's been longing for a companion for, many, many, many years at this point. And he has a bit of a dream and comes up with this bit of a plan that says to himself, if I just rescue one of these people that the cannibals are eating without getting eaten myself or having the cannibals realize I'm here, then I would have a loyal companion and a friend. But interestingly enough about Friday is he actually too becomes a convert to Christianity and is loyal to Robinson, not just simply because he saved his own life, but now out of the his active faith that he has in his life. The dog extra pawn here can do either a gather or a hunt action. And interestingly, in the novel, Robinson does have a dog, which is the captain's dog from the ship that initially sunk with him on it. But when it comes to hunting, this dog is not so good. He's not even good when it comes to just helping move the goats around from place to place. He's more of just simply a furry companion that Robinson has. But hey, these I think are probably otherwise good thematic actions that a dog could take. In the board game, there will be 10 items randomly available each time you play the game, which you have the option of building. And hopefully you are able to build because it's really handy to build items in the game. And of these items, I mean, there's a map. There's no such thing as that in the game. Furnace, not in the game. Drums, not in the game. Knife, I think Robinson ends up making his own like knives eventually. I don't actually even think he really does that. I'm not sure. He probably does, but I don't think it's mentioned that I recall. I mean, I didn't memorize all 280 pages, but yeah, so lots of these items obviously are not in the book, but there are some that are and that are kind of interesting. For example, the diary. The book itself is actually Robinson's diary, and at one point it really takes the format of a diary, like date, something stated about the day, date, something stated about the day, so that's pretty interesting. And baskets. Robinson becomes a very good basket weaver. Again, given enough time, given enough patience, you can do just about anything Robinson claims, and basket weaving is one of them, and he uses it to carry his crops in. A lantern. He does have a kind of lamp that he eventually makes with some wax, puts it together from some of the animals that he ends up eating. Pot. He gets very good at making earthenware pots. This is one that took him a very long time to get right. Everything that he was initially making was shattering, but finally he made some sturdy pots. No bricks to be had. Rope. Lots of that he got off the ship. Fortunately for Robinson, he got to start with that. And the cure. That's actually a really interesting one. In the novel, Robinson, at one point he does get very sick. He's got like fever and chills. They call it the ague, A-G-U-E. I'm not sure how to say it. Maybe some of you guys will know. But he gets himself some tobacco, and at first he attempts to chew it and spits it out. He finds this is not good at all and not helpful. Then he thinks, well, maybe I could steep it in some rum. And it's actually when he's looking for the rum that he finds his Bible, which is ultimately, again, what I said becomes his spiritual sustenance for his stay on the island. So he's looking for rum. He gets some rum. He steeps his tobacco in it, drinks that. Again, not so good. And finally, his experiment leads him to create a charcoal fire of which he burns the tobacco on it and inhales as much of the smoke as he possibly can till he's basically passed out, and then he finds that he sleeps for well over a day, at which point he's feeling a lot better. So I think probably Robinson's cure, a little bit extreme, unfortunately wasn't included in the board game, but good that we have a cure card, because, I mean, that's, you know, very handy for those of us who manage to get ourselves wounded hunting or doing something else in the game. Alright, what else is there? Oh, this is an interesting one. Okay, so in the game, there is this hunt deck, or beast deck. I think it's called the beast deck. And like I said, when Robinson first lands, he is just like scared out of his mind because he doesn't know what kind of creatures could possibly be on there. I mean, there could be well, those are all the tame ones, a puma, an alligator, maybe wild dogs, a boa, a gorilla, a bear, a cheetah, a tiger, a jaguar. No, Robinson, you landed on the absolute safest, most perfectly inhabited island there is, because really all there is are birds, goats, and there's no tortoises in here, but lots of tortoises of which he loves eating their eggs. So again, I think probably having a more decent beast deck than what was actually present on the island makes this game more interesting, makes it more challenging, because most of these other animals, like the tiger, ultimately do you a lot of damage when you go out to try and hunt them. But in the novel, like I said, it's a completely safe island for Robinson, so he's very fortunate in that way. In the game, there is this mystery deck, kind of like a treasure deck, but honestly more of a mystery deck, because though there is a treasure chest, you ought not to be fooled. In fact, if you have not played Robinson Crusoe and you find you're on the brink of death and you're thinking, oh, but I could get this treasure card and I'm sure it will help, because aren't treasure cards always good? I mean, it's treasure. Don't be fooled. Most of these are not so good and you don't want to encounter one. They could destroy the game for you. I mean, some of them are not bad, but here's a snake for you that you found in the deck. You know, take 2 wounds. Blunt spear, old and covered in spider webs. A spear hits you in the chest. Another 2 wounds. Terrible scream. Discard all your determination tokens, which is very, makes a big difference in the game because it has a lot to do with your morale and your ability to do your special powers on your character cards. So like I said, you know, none of these things for the most part are things that Robinson finds. Really, his biggest find is his countryside home and probably the tortoises. And I guess also the cannibals, because in the end the cannibals lead him to Joe Friday, and they also, kind of in a way facilitate his way off of the island. I won't say too much more on that part. Something else that's very critical to Robinson Crusoe, the board game, and Robinson Crusoe, the novel, is the weather. And there are these 2 weather dice in the game. Interestingly about the weather dice is, at least in some of the scenarios, I haven't played all of them, you actually don't start rolling the weather dice until a number of turns in. And this is interesting because for the most part, Robinson begins with really nice weather as well. But eventually, finally, he hits the rainy season and he'll get stuck in for several days at a time where he is. And I mean, over his time on the island, he's able to figure out what the dry and rainy seasons are. But the rainy seasons are quite treacherous to him. At one point, he's got the roof of his cave falls in on him because there's such a downpour and there's an earthquake at the same time. And similarly in Robinson Crusoe, the board game, there's that delay. You think you've got good weather, you know, nothing bad, but honestly, once the weather hits, it's all downhill from there. In the game, there is also this event deck, and the event deck is a pretty neat component of the game, not only because it's such a large deck, which means lots of variety every time you play, but there are split events on each card. So the very top event will always happen, but the bottom event, you can decide which way it's going to swing. Basically, if you assign an action pawn, and in this case, you have also the resources or items available, then you can usually have something positive happen to you or simply prevent a negative from happening to you. Otherwise, generally, you're going to suffer. So it's, all about mitigation in that part of the game. But what's interesting and neat about this deck as well is that a lot of these things have to do with the weather. And the weather is covered in some capacity already by the weather dice. For Robinson on the island in the novel, honestly, weather is pretty much one of his biggest concerns and one of the main things he has to encounter and prioritize as part of his island life. He sets about recording exactly when the rainy seasons are going to hit, when the dry seasons are. He works out all his crop timings around that. So to have things like high water and cold rain and awful weather and disaster and devastating hurricane and raging river and thunderstorm all included in the event deck is, to be honest, very accurate. There are, of course, a ton more events that are in here and things that don't make it into the novel or aren't present in the novel. Ravenous predators, for example, or mess in the camp. Robinson, his mess is his mess. It's not because of anybody else. Sleepless night, that actually also another one happens in the book. Trying to remember exactly what he was feeling sleepless over. Probably happened a couple times, but there is definitely at least one instance where he's just simply musing all night long. He can't get something off his mind. Oh, you know what it is? It's when he sees the footprint in the sand, a single footprint, and he can't figure out, is he just not run into someone who does live on the island? Is it that someone's come over from the mainland? Is it cannibals? Is it not? And he is now just in perpetual fear. So that results in his sleepless night. So yeah, a really neat event deck. You know, there's a fair amount that accurately reflect Robinson's experience that he had. Though, yeah, no vertigo, no poisoning. But who knows, at the same time, maybe Ignacy has insight into the parts of Robinson's life that we didn't get to record, and that's why we get to play a board game to fill in those gaps that we're not otherwise privy to in the novel. That'd be kind of cool to think about, wouldn't it? In the game, there's also these 3 different adventure decks. They correspond to there's a number of different actions you can take, but 3 particular actions to gathering, exploring, and building. And you only have to draw them occasionally under certain dice roll conditions. I'd say that unlike the event deck, most of these don't really correspond to anything particular in the novel, like thorny bush, swamp, old hut, something in the air, wild dog, empty forest, things like that. Again, no real correlation with the novel, but at the same time, it's really great that, you know, each time you play, you only use a couple of these cards, and of course you can shuffle them, so it's different every game what ones may come out, even if you've seen them before. And so I think that adds great variety to the game and makes it a really replayable game. Again, don't be fooled. Most of these are bad. I'm already looking at losing health on this one here, dangerous terrain. But as I've said probably already too many times in this video, makes it a much more interesting game when it is difficult and cooperative. So I think the last thing I'll mention is morale, because morale is captured very well in the game and is certainly a key theme throughout the novel. As I already mentioned, Robinson is a Christian in the novel, and it is his Bible which ultimately upkeeps him in his morale day after day after day. In the board game, you definitely need to focus on keeping your morale up equally as much as I think Robinson needed to in order to survive the Island of Despair. And your morale basically influences your ability to gain determination tokens, which fuel your character's special abilities and are really, again, key to your success in the game. So I think, again, just another amazing aspect, amazing theme that came out of the game and made it into, or came out of the novel and made it into the board game. So I really have to say I'm really impressed with how the novel was translated into a board game. I think Ignacy, again, I'm botching his name, but I think he did an amazing job doing that, and I think that this is a game with staying power, cooperative game with staying power, and I think this novel obviously has demonstrated its staying power, considering that it kind of set the stage for novels of this kind, again, published in 1719. Wow, way to go, Daniel Defoe. And, you know, again, we see lots of different things being translated into board games that are not just novels, but movies and television are obviously very popular. Star Wars has certainly swept the board game scene in many ways, with X-Wing miniatures and Queen's Gambit and all sorts of stuff like that. And Monopoly gets, you know, every shade under the sun. And then, you know, there's just regular old history, you know, telling the story of history through board gaming. And some designers, again, have really taken that and done just an amazing job with games like Pax Renaissance or Napoleon's Triumph or Washington's War, simulating the American Revolution. We've been playing that one lately. And so, again, we really owe it to our designers to thanks for telling us a good story, and we just keep at it. All right, guys, don't forget to follow the channel, subscribe, like, and comment, and we'll see you next time.